thanks again for taking time out of your schedules to dial in, and wherever you're calling us from. I hope it's a little less wintry than it is here in Ottawa today. I've got a few things to run through just before we get the session started. For those who participated in our consultation a couple of weeks ago, this will be a little repetitive, so please bear with me. I'll try to be brief. For those who don't know me, my name is Ryan Greer. I work for Prairie Sky Strategy, and I'm also co-chair of the Canadian Chamber's National Cannabis Working Group. That group is co-chaired by Nathan Nyson from Diplomat Consulting. I believe we've got you on the line, Nathan. Is that correct?
I'm here. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today.
Fantastic. So the why, I think we all know, which is Health Canada's preparing to undertake its statutory review of the Cannabis Act starting next October, which is the 30-year anniversary of legalization. So in advance of that, the National Cannabis Working Group had announced that we would be leading an industry-led review of the Act to identify what we see as our members and others the industry's biggest priorities, and then jointly advocate them on them to Health Canada. So this meeting is the second of 6 public consultation sessions that we're running over the fall and the winter. Once we get through these 6 public sessions, they'll be followed by more targeted consultations with our members, specifically public health advocates, academics, provincial regulators next spring. And the idea is that we will take all of that and arrive at a series of recommendations that we can start advocating on well in advance of Health Canada's initiation of the review next fall. And for those who didn't participate in our first session, one of the things we discussed is those timelines that Health Canada does have for the review, and there was pretty broad consensus that in addition to advocating for the things we want to see in the review, that we should be advocating for the review to, if anything else, start earlier, and that it shouldn't take the full 18 months that Health Canada has under the legislation to conduct the review. I'd like to thank our working group members, Dentons and Davies, specifically Eric Foster from Dentons and Eliza Kearney from Davies. Eric is leading our review process with the support of Eliza and Davies, and we're really, really fortunate as a group to have these 2 accomplished cannabis lawyers and their firms behind us and helping us with the effort. And I'm going to be turning it over to Eric to lead today's session here in a couple of minutes. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I said this at the beginning of the last session, so for anybody who wasn't at that session, I'll remind anyone new to this session, which is this is a public consultation, which means members of the media or governments or regulators may be present for some or all of the session. So as with any public event, please keep in mind that comments during the session may be attributed to you or your organization. If there are comments you would like to make but not on the record, you can do so in a few ways. The first is, I've mentioned it and I'm going to mention it again, we've got a survey set up for everybody participating in this consultation to fill out answers to. And there's also an email address you can see on your screen, which is cannabis@chamber.ca. Please use that for any comments that maybe you don't want to be on the record with, or that you maybe don't have an opportunity to share today. So to reiterate, comments made during this session are on the public record. So today's session, as advertised, is on issues related to retail, more broadly economic development and environmental sustainability. These are especially broad topics, but we'd ask you to try to keep your interventions focused as much as possible on these topics. We do have multiple sessions scheduled for the future on other issues, which if you haven't yet, we'd encourage you to register for. On December 9th, which is 2 weeks from today, we're doing marketing, promotions, and labeling. Then we're taking a Christmas break. We're coming back on Wednesday, January 20th for a discussion on medical cannabis and cannabis health products. We've got another discussion scheduled for Wednesday, February 3rd on the illicit market and anti-money laundering. And then we've got a discussion scheduled for Wednesday, February 17th, which is on ancillary business issues. So please go find and register for those. I really appreciate everybody taking the time. And with that, I will stop going on and turn it over to Eric Foster, who's going to lead our discussion today.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Ryan. As always, greatly appreciated. And again, I won't recap everything that Ryan said. I'm monitoring. I'm doing my best. I'm also a little bit new to this platform, but I'm monitoring really closely the hand raising, the chat. So again, don't be shy. As Ryan reiterated, these sessions are really, really important for the overall process. We want to hear from everybody on the line. We want to hear what your pressure points are. We've got 3 really interesting and broad topics today, so I'm certainly interested in hearing where the discussion goes. But again, I really want to reiterate, the point of this is for Elisa from Davies, myself from Denton's, Ryan and Nathan, effectively the steering committee for this initiative, to really get that meaningful feedback from the industry. So again, just really want to encourage participation. I hear it day in and day out from clients and everybody that I speak with that there are issues, and unless this is the exact forum for you to articulate those, and then we can all work collaboratively to really try to bring change forward. So just want to encourage everybody, just like last time, feel free to participate. We want you to, and I will be monitoring the hand raising function and call on you as quickly as possible. But maybe to kick it off, and I propose we just really go in order in terms of the agenda for today. We've got 3 topics: retail, economic development, and environmental sustainability. So obviously really, really broad topics. Retail is something that's certainly near and dear to my heart. And again, don't have anybody lined up to kick off a comment. So again, encourage somebody to raise their hand to the extent they'd like to make a remark. But the things I'm thinking of from a retail perspective, at least, stepping back, we've got all the provinces and territories right now have completely different retail regimes for the way in which cannabis is distributed within their particular province. So something that I hear day in and day out is, who got it right, who got it wrong. Everybody, Alberta seems to be the one that I would say, generally speaking, people think got it the most right. And I think a lot of people think every other province, in fact, may have got it wrong too, but that's not even to say Alberta got it perfect. So would love to hear some thoughts around that in terms of just the general, at a larger level, which regimes have worked really well for stakeholders and which regimes haven't, and in particular, what are the particular points that have worked really well in one province that maybe will work in another province that in fact hasn't put those same restrictions or same regulations in place. And then beyond that, I'd also love to hear some thoughts around the general eligibility criteria for actually obtaining an operator license or store authorization or whatever the particular license is within your particular province. And again, this goes back to some of the conversation we had at the last session around reducing the regulatory burden, right? The regulators are constantly going to ensure that the stated goals of health and preserving health and safety are paramount, but perhaps there are some things that could be loosened or make it a little bit easier to become eligible to start a retail cannabis business, or alternatively, maybe in fact there are some additional restrictions or eligibility requirements that should be put in place. So again, those are the types of things that I hear day in and day out. So again, would love to get some thoughts from the group. I'm not gonna call anybody out, but I can't imagine with 84 participants, we have nobody who's interested in making a few comments. And again, I do see some of Canada's most preeminent retailers on the participants list. So I will not call you out. But I see, and there we go. Speaking of one of Canada's most preeminent retailers, I see Nadia Vadavaz, who I know is the CFO from Fire and Flower, has a couple of comments to make. So maybe we'll turn it over to you, Nadia. And sorry, can the operator just please unmute Nadia?
Nadia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Anyway, I actually think Saskatchewan does it the best. So we operate in Saskatchewan where the model is such that there is no government intervention like the AGLC or the OCS. And in fact, we source product directly from the licensed producers. And there is a fee that goes to the government to be able to operate as a retailer. And they take their taxes, but we source the product directly. We deal with the LPs directly. And that has translated into getting the best product to our customers, our ability to transfer product among our locations, our ability to price appropriately and competitively, and we also get the best margins in that province. We can curbside pickup, we can do delivery, and so essentially we can act like a regular retailer. And of course, there are all the requirements of, the regulatory requirements for being a licensed retailer in cannabis. And quite frankly, there is some pretty strict rules there in terms of reporting. But at the end of the day, it's probably the most efficient system that I've seen for cannabis retail, and we operate in many provinces. And as a long-term retailer, it allows me the most flexibility from a retail perspective in order to provide the customer the best possible product and experience.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Nadia. And maybe just, if you don't mind leaving Nadia's line open for a second, like, Saskatchewan, to my knowledge, is the only one that allows that true kind of private wholesale model. And I guess I assume you guys, it sounds like you like that model. Like, it works for you. Are you seeing tons of efficiencies, and is that something that should be advocated for with respect to the other provinces? Like, is there good evidence and proof out there, at least from what you're seeing in your business operations, that this really does move the needle or can move the needle for retailers?
Absolutely. I see our highest margin. I see our best, in terms of sell-through rates, or for those retailers on the call, when it comes to the product we choose versus what we're selling, how fast we sell it, et cetera, we have our highest, sort of call it inventory efficiencies. We have the ability to work with LPs to either ship direct to stores or ship to warehouse. So we can make those real-time calls in terms of where we want our product to go and how we want it to be sold most effectively. We work directly with the LPs in terms of securing the best pricing. I'm sure there's a lot of retailers out there who have suffered the wrath of purchasing product at a certain price from the OCS, only for the OCS to drop the price. And then you have product that you have in stock that you've purchased at a higher price. And this is to be expected in this industry, as prices evolve and new products come on board. So the ability to respond very quickly to that is really only available in Saskatchewan. When it comes to understanding our customers, now we operate, in all fairness, we also operate a distribution facility in Saskatchewan. So we have the ability to really see, what's being purchased out there, not only by us, but by other retailers. And I would say that if anybody else who operates in Saskatchewan is on the call, I think they're also getting the best prices, and they're also getting the best offering for the customers. And one thing that's always been an issue is, look, as we determine, and we're heavily data driven at Fire and Flower. So as we determine, what customers like, what type of product, the ability to move our product freely from location to location to maximize our sales has also been mission critical in making sure that, our working capital is effective. So, I could go on, but I think those are the key ones.
So really helpful. And I see we'll go to Adrian and Craig in a minute, but actually I'm going to cold call on you, Nathan, just because I know that you're so involved in this on the advocacy side with the government. Like, is this a topic that comes up frequently in your discussions with the various provinces in terms of pointing out, we do have a clear outlier here in Saskatchewan, and, based on Nadia's feedback and I think feedback from others, even looking at the chat right now, this seems to work and seems to be something that the industry supports. So Nathan, out of curiosity, is this something that you're hearing a lot of buzz about amongst the provinces as hopefully, over time they do continue to fine tune their various regimes?
Thanks, Ryan, or thanks, Eric. I appreciate so I think one of the things that's really interesting is that we have to take into consideration is that the model's still very dynamic. Like if we keep in mind that, like, using Ontario, Ontario started off as public and then moved to private, and then has been this weird kind of stutter step. Alberta has had has been out in front because of the role of AGLC. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody today about this, just as a quick direct comparison. Liquor in Alberta is an allocated model with a flow through, and it generates $800 million a year in revenue. Cannabis, which is purchased by the AGLC on behalf of retailers, lost them 30 million this year. So I think the fact that in the time that we live in, lots of discussions are evolving from a point of governmental review, revenues, cost centers, where there will be some opportunities to have conversations about efficiencies. I think one of the quick things about the review process that's interesting is, Canada being Canada, we have 13 different models of cannabis regulation when it comes to a retail environment. It would be really interesting as we go forward to do a best practice review to see what models work best for the ends, where we can take that information, consolidate it, create an overarching model, and then do something crazy like export that knowledge to the world as other countries are moving into cannabis legalization. So I think there's some real interesting opportunities, and government right now is looking at everything because COVID has been the great accelerator. So yes, there are conversations about the models that provinces are doing and what they're looking at right now, and they've been louder today than they were even 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, not surprising. And again, just going to what I'm seeing in the chat, right? And I already see comments here around people saying, confirming, the Saskatchewan model really is effective. And it's there's a comment here, how it most emulates traditional retail norms for margin and inventory controls. And really, I think as a large group here, we all agree that this is, it's a different industry, but it really should not be disadvantaged compared to any other retail industry, right? That is really, I think, the most important thing that as a group we can continue to advocate for. So really terrific comments there. Maybe we'll go to Adrian Rodriguez now. If we can unmute Adrian, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you both, Nadia, Nathan, and everyone that's commenting. I have to agree with all of the comments that have been made so far, especially looking at Saskatchewan as a model for retail and what has worked before, and continue advocating for that harmonization of the approach to private retailers. I think that we need to be very specific about what we're asking for, especially with, like you mentioned, how the pandemic has really accelerated what we're seeing in terms of cannabis being sold, and that in comparison to what the different provincial governments are doing or not doing when we're looking at online sales and fully functional e-commerce platforms. So we need to advocate on behalf of retailers so that that can be done. I think that there is an opportunity for when that harmonization occurs, for an improvement in the relationships between producers and retailers, which are ultimately going to benefit consumers and how we educate consumers about cannabis, and about cannabis being a consumer packaged good. So I think that, like you said here, there's a lot of room to grow and improve, and a lot of advocacy that can happen on this end.
Excellent. So I see also Craig Hamilton wants to make some remarks.
Hi guys, sorry I just unmuted myself there. So I am a sole proprietor, probably one of the few people who signed up that way. Struggling through all of these regulations. Actually, Lucas is helping me along the way here. The thing that I see is that there seems to be a lot of shifting of regulations as we go along. Like, you have to put in one thing one week and then it seems to change. Is that going to ever stop, or will that be just an ongoing problem?
Yeah, and out of curiosity, where are you operating?
So I have not started even operating yet. We are in the RSA stage. I am in Lakefield, Ontario, east of Toronto, about 2 hours in cottage country. I work for Remax right now. I sell real estate, but this is a new project. I think I signed up for my ROL on March 4th, and then the whole world fell apart on March 12th.
Yeah, and look, the regulations are changing constantly, right? And that's something that, I deal with day in. As a cannabis lawyer, I'm dealing with that day in and day out across, 10 provinces, multiple territories. So, this is such a new area of law, and frankly, it's a new regulatory regime that I think it's reasonable to expect there will continue to be that rapid pace of change. Again, hopefully all the changes for the better. And a great example, obviously, is in Ontario, just, what they passed over the weekend, for example, to reopen curbside pickup and delivery and e-commerce platforms for those Ontario retailers that are in the currently newly locked down region. So it moves really quickly. I think for the 90 plus people on this call who are all involved in the cannabis industry. I suspect none of those 90 people have slept over the last number of years. So yeah, it's ever evolving. But again, I think the hope and goal of this initiative is to try to stabilize that, right? We've now had enough time, I think, throughout the country to get a sense of what's working and what's not working, or at least we're getting a sense by this exact process. And then from that, hopefully can get meaningful change and put a pin in some of this. So you're right, because it is hard to constantly be pivoting when the goalpost seems to shift every once in a while. But I see Ryan also has his hand up. So I'm sorry, Craig, any follow-up remarks? Craig? Oh, can we unmute Craig? All right, Craig. I think we missed you. Unfortunately, we'll make sure that the moderator, who's not me, who's controlling the muting and unmutes you shortly. But maybe we'll go to Ryan in the meantime.
Yeah, just while we're doing that, one on specifically the interprovincial models, one suggestion that we can pursue that isn't as exciting as aligning models, but also I think is lower hanging fruit, is aligning some of the requirements between provinces, whether it's security clearances or other processes that differ province by province. The federal government and all the provincial governments have something called the Regulatory Reconciliation and Cooperation Table that was created when provinces signed the Canadian Free Trade Agreement in 2017. And this is precisely the work they do, which is taking the germane requirements that exist among provinces in many different regulatory fields, and in a very workmanlike and sometimes dry and lengthy fashion, they set work plans, and then over sort of 4, 5, 6, 8 months, look to align requirements. So as a sort of an interim step as well on some of the stuff for especially the retailers that are obviously operating between provinces, if you're able to get aligned requirements on some of the security clearances and those sorts of things, there is a vehicle to do that. It exists to identify these and work their way through them. So that's one other sort of tack we could take on some of the lower hanging stuff.
Yeah. And aside from, we've talked about it at a higher level now and would love to keep talking about it. But another thing that we hear about frequently, at least on the retail side, are what other, we've talked, I guess, about the regimes itself, what you need to do and how it functions in Saskatchewan versus Ontario. I see some terrific comments here, interesting about the regime in the Yukon. But beyond that, when we get now down to kind of the retail level, would love to hear more thoughts around other changes and policy and regulatory changes that can help, move more consumers away from the illegal market, which is, of course, the main, or not the main, one of the absolute main goals of this entire cannabis regime, having consumers move away from the illegal market to regulated retailers. What sorts of changes would help promote that? I don't want to get too much into marketing and promotion because we do have a whole separate, and I appreciate that as a huge element of this. We do have a separate, our next session is really going to be specifically on marketing, promotion, labeling. But by all means, would love to hear some thoughts on that too. But what else is there? What are the other types of issues or pressure points that retailers are feeling right now that say, well, if we could maybe clean this up or fix this little problem, our businesses would thrive and we'd pull all those new consumers in from the illicit market. So I see Tabitha Fritz has her hand up. So maybe we can go to Tabitha and then we'll go to Nora afterwards. And sorry, one last thing, when you do make your remarks, if it would be helpful if you could just state which company you're with or just a little bit of very high level background, just so we can have some context for the remarks.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So my name is Tabitha Fritz. I'm a cannabis editor and as well I'm the CEO of Fritz's Cannabis Company. So we're a cannabis edibles company and we are making the transition currently from the legacy market into the regulated marketplace. We are working with an LP to do that. And one of the things that I think would make a big difference in terms of consumers moving over from the legacy market to the regulated market would be dosing on edibles, right? Limits of 10 milligrams per package are very low. And it's a completely different consumer group who are accessing 10 milligram edibles versus those in the legacy market who want much higher doses, right? Most people that I know consume at least 30 to 40 milligrams in a sitting. Personally, I take 300 milligrams at once. So I can't afford to take regulated market edibles. So I think that's one thing that would help.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we've heard that, time and time again. You're not the first person I've heard make a very similar comment in that regard. So very helpful. Nora would like to make a couple comments too, I believe.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. So one of the things that I feel that is important, especially when we're talking about the legacy market, is the barrier to entry for legacy market entrants into the regulated space. The barrier to entry is extremely high if you're not connected with a licensed producer or a processor. It just makes it really difficult for those in the legacy market to move over. And there are brands that have successfully done that. However, the barrier to entry is quite large. Sorry, and I should also just preface, I'm with Emerald Health. I'm the marketing manager at Emerald Health.
Excellent. Yeah, I know barriers are for sure high. And then, one other thing, and again, I'm going back to the chat and see Deepak's made some terrific comments here too. I guess the broader general thing we haven't really discussed is that how all of these things we've talked about, how they really actually fit into the federal regime, right? At the end of the day, what we've talked so far primarily about is, the various different provincial regimes, and as noted in the comments, and I agree wholeheartedly with this, we haven't seen a lot of interaction between the federal level and the provincial retail level, right? Health Canada, as we talked about in our last session, Health Canada kind of dominates things up at the federal level. And they're not really speaking with the provinces. It's almost like they've said, okay, we've regulated this federally, and now provinces, you're on your own. So, which is obviously what resulted in these completely different regimes all over the country. So, would love thoughts to the extent anybody has any on, again, ways that we can change this. What this initiative is, remember, is tied back to the Federal Cannabis Act. So things that we can do with respect to the federal law that will help promote some of these changes. And it may just be as simple as really making sure the various different levels of government are speaking with each other. But, it would be great to try to get more engagement in that regard.
I think
Sorry, I think somebody, I don't know if that was Cam or
Eric,
Deepak.
I would just point out, and Deepak said it, so I'm trying to scoop, I guess I'm scooping his thunder a little bit, but it was something that it does bear repeating, and that is that there is an FPT working group where the federal, provincial, territorial governments come together around the table and have discussions. I know that when I was with Organigram, we were engaged indirectly with that group through, our contacts with AGLC or Cannabis NB or what have you. But I don't know, and I think Deepak pointed it out, that there's been much coordination in terms of that overall group nationwide. So I'd be interested to know if anybody's actually engaged with that group beyond just kind of the indirect kind of contacts that I've had. But it is definitely worth having that conversation with them at some point on some of these issues.
Yeah, and Deepak, I see your hands up, so would love to get your thoughts too.
Yeah, so just on that side, we've had quite a bit of kind of progress with respect to meeting and chatting with the FPT group. When I say that, when I say we, we've had discussions from a Normal Canada perspective as well as from a CFAM perspective, or MCC as we're now called. So there has been some engagement. I think there hasn't been nearly enough engagement from retailers or from this community as I would like to see, but there's no reason why, a demand can be made to Health Canada to facilitate those conversations between this group or people on this call, particularly retailers, to speak to those provincial reps. In many cases, people like retailers on this call and don't even know who's on the FPT group from a provincial level, and that's going to be pretty critical to getting involved in the discussion. So I think that's something that can certainly be done. I think the question around barriers that was brought up earlier is also a live one, and I think again there, if you look at BC as an example, in the Kootenays, they formed a group. The provincial government is actually paying for the formation of a consulting group to specifically assist applicants for free on transitioning into the legacy market. These are not, not consultants that are assisting license holders. These are consultants that are helping small businesses. So, I think it's important that we include them in the conversation and also get more provinces to do the same. I think this issue is not isolated to BC. We certainly have a number of kind of craft legacy producers in BC, but it's not isolated to this market. And the last thing I'll say on that is that, you know, there's no reason why the retailers shouldn't be asking provincial governments for similar support with respect to a working group and, you know, meeting with provinces and the federal government to address these issues. I think all these asks can certainly be made. I haven't seen it so far being done with all the interactions I've had with Health Canada, but doesn't mean it can't be done. And I think we should be recommending for that.
Yeah, no, great points as always, and I'd be shocked if anybody on this call disagrees with anything you just said there, Deepak, as per usual. But anyways, and again, look forward to some additional comments, hopefully from you a little bit later. I see Mimi wants to chime in here, so maybe we'll give her the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. My name is Mimi. I'm with Superette, an Ontario-based retailer. And so my comments are surrounding the involvement of federal government with respect to retail and the perspective that they may have. And so even ahead of this conversation, I felt a little stuck in terms of what we were going to discuss, because the federal government has largely been hands-off with the retail process in general. We know that when the Cannabis Act came along, they just pushed the retail and distribution down to the provinces, who came up with their own framework, which was a result of this, you know, fragmented system. And so a lot of my frustrations are specific to the Ontario government and having to deal with the provincial level, you know, regulatory bodies and agencies. But I'm curious, you know, now that time has passed, if the federal government is taking a different perspective in terms of wanting to, I'm not going to say unify, but maybe streamline the process across the board, because right now it is quite broken, not just within province, but across provinces and territories. And, you know, to that end, you know, how is an agency like the Ontario Cannabis Store viewed in the federal level? And like how, you know, what is their position on their involvement with retailers, and what is the overarching goal of retail as the point of distribution when it comes to cannabis as a federally legalized industry in the first place?
Yeah, terrific point. And again, I think, you know, I question how useful the various, you know, FPT committee working groups have been so far. So again, it's good to see some activity there, but again, I don't think it's anywhere near enough. And this actually, I think, maybe dovetails really nicely into the second subject, which again, I'm happy to and want to keep chatting about retail. And I see we've got Dennis who wants to make some comments, but also around a general conversation just around economic development, right? At the end of the day, one of the things we talked about at our last session was that there's probably been not enough of an economic mandate tied to the cannabis file with the government, and some of the comments you make speak directly to that, right? How can we make this an economic success across the entire country? So really spot on from my perspective. Dennis, I see you've popped your hand up, so maybe we can flip over to Dennis.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Denny Gertler, Senior Regulatory Advisor at CanDelta Inc. So I'd like to pick up on something that you mentioned, Eric, where you were pointing out some of the discrepancies or maybe, you know, some of the lack of congruence between federal and provincial regimes. I mean, to some extent, that's, you know, to be expected. But I think it is a problem for business in terms of consistency across the country. I'm thinking about promotion and inducements in particular right now. Many of you know there was a bulletin released by federal government a few weeks ago, and one of the hot topics that we hear about all the time is discounting, and it still isn't very clear. Discounting is frowned on, and but it is acknowledged to be pricing is acknowledged to be a business decision, except where it prompts excessive consumption or use by young persons. And so what does that mean, right? And a lot of people have based their business models around discounting. There's a lot of semantics and playing with that. I think it's one area, for example, where a task force or some form of engagement to try and at least create clearer boundaries around permissible practices would be useful for the industry.
sure. And I see Ryan wants to chime in again, and appreciate your thoughts. And I'm sure you're going to scold me to move on to the next topic too, which we can which we can do in a couple of minutes. But Ryan, we'll turn it back over to you.
No, absolutely not going to scold. In fact, you're doing a tremendous job, and I think the purpose of the discussion is to talk about the issues that people want to talk about. So as long as there's some steam, left in the retail discussion, by all means, it should continue. I just wanted to sort of do two things. One was just to react to something that Mimi said, and sort of just help position this exercise for everybody that's joining us, which is, we've specifically set up these consultations with regard to the Federal Act review, and the output of that, we of course want to have very specific recommendations to the federal government on changes to the Act. But that doesn't mean that we're not thinking about the broader policy issues, the interprovincial ones, reflecting on some of the challenges that specific provinces has had on retail. So what we come out of this with won't just be, here are the narrow things that fit within the Cannabis Act that we want to change. I think there's sort of two buckets. There's this, here's our advice to Health Canada on the Act specifically, but then I think there's a bunch of broader policy issues that we can identify that might rest outside the Act review as Health Canada sees it, but that are incredibly important to the future of the industry, and certainly leadership with the provinces, the work of some of these FPT groups, and everything else will be incredibly important as well. And so, we won't be setting any of that aside just because it doesn't specifically rest with the review. The only other thing I wanted to say, this will be my mid-meeting reminder, is as you're listening in, please take the time to fill out our survey, which is one more way that we're collecting feedback for this. Some of the questions are multiple choice, and we'll take a couple seconds. Others are open-ended to share some of the input if you haven't shared it already in the chat. So you can find the information to fill out the survey in the chat, but it's www.sli.do. And the meeting is #CannabisNov25. That'll be open half an hour after we finish this. We'll be using all of that as well in consolidating our feedback. And Christy will post a link to that in the chat again right now. So I just want to do one more plug for that while we continue, Eric.
Excellent. So I see we've got Jeremy, and then Nathan, and then back to Nora. So maybe we'll open up the floor to Jeremy now.
Thanks, Eric. Hey, Jeremy Adams with Altria International on behalf of Kronos Group. Just one issue we wanted to flag from a producer's perspective, which we're really struggling with, and we're also trying to reach out. We've reached out actually some other producers on this from a trade association perspective. It's this challenge on what I'll call freshness dates, because they're not really freshness dates, and they're certainly not consistent. And a freshness date in one province might not actually have anything to do with whether the product's fresh. It has specifically to do with what is called in BC, a maximum age of inventory. In Ontario, it's a pack date. So the challenge here is you can have the exact same product that is, for some reason, is good for 365 days in the Yukon, but for some other unknown reason that I'm reluctant to call arbitrary, but from our perspective, it can only be seen as arbitrary. That same product is only good for 90 days in Nova Scotia and then 120 days in New Brunswick. So from an inventory management perspective, again, back to this is a growing novel marketplace for consumers. There's no consistency across the country in terms of how inventory can be managed. And for a producer, and certainly for smaller producers or for niche products, it becomes a challenge to be able to have to comply with that. What's the solution? Well, we're working right now to determine how we can have that dialogue to first back off from that term arbitrary and try and understand from a provincial regulator perspective why they've chosen a 90-day, quote, shelf life for one product and something completely different for another product, even though the data, again, may not support whether that's a date or not. Find out from them why they need to do that, what their issues on that, and hopefully try and bring some consistency nationally, right? Like if I buy a consumer packaged good in Alberta, it's not somehow less good if I buy the same product in Manitoba. And cannabis should really have that same consideration when it comes to the consumer-facing side of the business here. And I guess from a federal perspective, when in doubt, set up a FedProv working group to bring these people together to start to talk to how we can get some consistency in some of those issues. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeremy. It's a really, really terrific point, actually. spot on, and it's something I've also actually heard from LPs who've had trouble navigating those rules. Nathan, and again, I'll look at Nathan, but again, I think this just goes back to that general point we've already talked about so many times about having this industry treated just like any other industry. We don't need special rules. There needs to be some special rules, but when you're talking about just general CPG, this should be treated like any other business, frankly. But Nathan, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Eric. I completely agree. I might have said that treat us the same as alcohol once or twice. I think it's a great parallel for us when it comes to retail. My favorite example, just quickly on that, before I get to what I wanted to talk about, was moored boats in Ontario that have a liquor license were allowed to do delivery of alcohol, but cannabis retailers won't. It just shows you how the rules are applied very differently. That's one of my favorite examples. I think one of the things that's an interesting thing to keep in mind about the provincial regulators, the provincial regulations that we live within, and the role of Health Canada, is how often the provincial regulators are frustrated with Health Canada as well. And the opportunity for us to work together as the sector with our regulators to ask for simple clarity around items from Health Canada on a timely matter that have direct impact. I think a great example of that is window coverings. I have a little bit of experience in window coverings between the provinces and the federal government, but we can talk about something as simple as when we started advocating for window covers to be removed in Alberta due to the unfortunate circumstance of a robbery, the AGLC told us that window coverings were never requested, even though at that time the 343 retailers in the province, 340 of them had window coverings. We've seen British Columbia recently make an announcement that you can have full transparency in BC, which is in violation to Health Canada's and the Cannabis Act's role. So I think there's some real opportunity for us to work together more with our provincial regulators for pushing for some of the clarity that retailers and the sectors are looking for, and building common, powerful allies as we move into the Act. And I think that's something that you'd be surprised how many retailers, regulators, license holders could do if we did that together. So I just wanted to add that because we have that conversation a lot, and they're frustrated as much as we are.
Terrific. So maybe we'll go to Nora and then over to Cameron.
Hi, thank you. Eric, I'm also a co-founder of the Louder Together Cannabis Advocacy Society, and as we're talking about economic development, I just want to shed some light on, how BIPOC communities are largely affected by the Cannabis Act and the policing of the Cannabis Act at convictions at much higher rates. How $274 million has been allocated to law enforcement, which targets BIPOC communities. It acts as a barrier to entry in for BIPOC communities who do have cannabis convictions. There's a lack of legislation recognizing the unique rights and jurisdictions of Indigenous peoples. And what we know is that the excise sales tax is going to continuing systemic racism in the policing of the Cannabis Act. So I just want to kind of maybe talk about that and really raise those issues as we talk about economic development within the Cannabis Act and how BIPOC communities are left out.
Yeah, no, it's such an important point. Again, ensuring that there's awareness and frankly engagement on all these things. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to chime in, but I think it's something that I know and was mentioned briefly, I think, in our last session, but probably something that again, as a broader group, would love to hear more thoughts on. It's so nobody can take away from the importance of those exact comments. And again, the whole point about this the whole point of this initiative is taking those groups that feel disenfranchised, right, and bringing them into the legal regulated regime and giving them a meaningful opportunity to participate, frankly, for the benefit of all Canadians. So really, really important points, ensuring that there's inclusiveness, engagement, through all spectrums of the country. But we'll go to Cam and then maybe back to Deepak.
Yeah, so I just on the economic development piece, I guess what I wanted to say is, one thing that I think most of us, I think, realize it, but it bears repeating that one of the biggest problems that we have with this sector as it pertains to perception within the provincial, federal, and even municipal governments is that politically we are toxic to them. We are not, unfortunately, viewed as a good bet. If you recall, when the 5 ministers announced, or the 4 ministers and Bill Blair announced the legislation, the Cannabis Act legislation, they just basically sat up on a stage and scowled down and made the insinuation that these were bad people doing bad things and bad products, and therefore they needed to be controlled. So unfortunately, the economic development aspect gets lost in that other narrative that exists. I know this because of my time when I was vice chair of the Cannabis Council of Canada. Obviously, firsthand I've seen it, but we went ahead and did a stakeholder study, and I'm happy to provide that, Eric, to you so that you can have a look at it and it can inform some of the dialogue. But in that stakeholder study, I think we spoke to 40 different, it was done by Abacus, and we spoke to 40 different stakeholders at the federal level, deputy ministers, cabinet ministers, political staffers, representatives of all political parties, the Prime Minister's office, and to a person, it didn't matter if they were a Conservative, a Liberal, an NDP, or a Bloc Québécois member, a Green member. They basically said, don't expect us to, the perception is, after years of prohibition, the perception is too ugly within this sector, so don't expect us to champion it. That was number one. Number two, the health minister and the health ministry is not predisposed to promoting this as an economic industry. They believe fundamentally that the public health concerns or the public health approach outweighs the economic development aspect, and that they look at it as a silo of excellence, that one doesn't cross over to the other. Case in point, when I was with Organogram, and at the time Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor was the health minister, and she was our local member of parliament. We employed 1,000 people in her riding. We couldn't get her to visit us at all until such time as we begged and screamed and made all sorts of noise. And Jeanette's director of policy said she's more than happy to come. Don't take any pictures, and please don't expect her to laud the benefits of the job creation aspects, because it runs counter to our message, our narrative, our federal narrative on economic development. So I say all that because there is a steep road to get them to care. We are kind of like the bastards at a family reunion, and that is something, as ugly as it is, it colors absolutely every policy discussion, and also the intransience of economic ministries, whether it's innovation, science, and economic development, or trade, or global affairs, to want to take us on, and for the government to want to actually split it out. They just do not want to touch us, because to them it's politically toxic. I know as well that ministers in ridings where there is a dominant community, for example, I know that a number of ministers are concerned that if they have South Asian constituents, or if they have Mandarin constituents, that it would be problematic for them to get reelected, because there is such a perception there. So what I've found, I guess that's a long way of saying, what I have found though to be of the most interest is the most ease rather, is to try and utilize your provincial representatives and your provincial governments and your municipal governments as well. And to that end, I think we need to do a better job as a sector in engaging with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and various other municipal groups to help us become advocates, because they now know firsthand the benefits from a job creation and infrastructure contribution perspective, this, that, and the other, more so rather than the federal and provincial governments. And frankly, they actually care on the day-to-day about ensuring our success, because we are become so integral to the communities, especially if you're in a small or medium community or rural or remote area. You have become much more, this sector has become much more important than a lifeline there. And the federal and provincial governments are more often than not going to respond to the municipalities in terms of what their needs are. Maybe not always, but they can become very, very powerful advocates. I think we are going to have a hell of a time trying to shift a narrative to economic development. This is, 2 years in, 3 years in, and I will cite the example before I, stop talking here. I will cite the example of even recently what they did during the middle of COVID. And I've said this before. this industry is being squeezed. Whether you're a small, medium, or large producer, there are barriers to entry for marginalized communities, legacy markets. But I will say that there has been also, a very high bar to actually get assistance from this government, a purportedly progressive government, on their signature legislative achievement, whether it's through BDC or FTC or FCC rather. And you have to have, there's all these hurdles to entry and to access that other companies do not face and other sectors do not face because they've been around for a long time and the government is predisposed to helping them. Case in point, if you wanted Farm Credit Canada, a line of credit or a grant or whatever it was that they were offering, you had to show two or 3 years of positive cash flow for the cannabis sector. How the hell is that possible? And the amount of fight that had to go into even getting the BDC to pay attention to this sector when they were announcing $300 million or $500 million worth of excess capital for businesses, to have this sector included was massive, the amount of stuff that had to go into even getting that. And even then it was inaccessible funding because of the criteria. But to me, the seminal moment during COVID has been that we are all required to pay 2.3% annual revenue from our organizations to the federal government as a regulatory fee. The federal government had been approached by industry, small, medium, and large, and told, please waive it for this year. We need that money. We need that operating capital. And then they went out and they did their consultation. Everybody in the industry said, waive it. And what did they do? They gave a deferral, which is so ridiculous, because that 2.3% doesn't mean that we've saved anything this year. It just means that we have to accrue it for a later date. So we're still getting screwed. So in the middle of a pandemic, they have no incentive even then of offering any sort of support whatsoever. If you accessed the wage subsidy, congratulations. And if you were able to access some of the supports at the provincial level, congratulations. But by and large, this sector is on its own in terms of its federal and provincial support. So we need to do a better job of engaging with those municipalities where we have helped rejuvenate the communities. Thank you.
So yeah, that's a tough one to follow, because again, I think I'm seeing a lot of nodding on the screens here and a lot of smiling. So Cameron, again, insightful as always. We'll go next to Deepak, and then afterwards over to Malka LaBelle, who I definitely remember gave some terrific insights at our last session. And looking at the chat here, I'm sure everybody can see it, but I love Malka's comment of education eats perception and stigma for breakfast. So well said, Malka, but maybe we'll go to Deepak next, and then over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of comments that were made with respect to the window covering issues that Nathan raised. So I think that's just and I think Lucas kind of alluded to this a little bit briefly. I think it's just a classical example of the massive confusion that people seem to have, including regulators in the space. So Health Canada never imposed on anyone the restriction to put window coverings on. There's nothing in the Cannabis Act that says that you must place window coverings. I think what the provinces have gone ahead and done is been overly cautious with respect to marketing, sales, and promotion activities, and said, well, if a kid sees it from outside, that could potentially be an issue. And here then you've got provinces that are trying to swim upwards and trying to get clarification from Health Canada for something that they had never really been responsible for. So I think it's just, we need to get as an industry ahead of these things and engage with people. There's a number of consultants on this call and in the industry in general, and just, reach out to them and clarify to the provinces, here's what you actually can do, here's what you can't do as far as the federal regulations are concerned. So, that's kind of point one. I think the BIPOC issue that was brought up is a live one. I hear a lot about it, and I hear a lot of echoes with respect to it being a problem without any solutions. And I think that's just an overarching theme that I think we should probably look to target is, are we asking Health Canada how many people of color have actually gotten licenses? How many people of minorities have actually gotten pardons that have been disproportionately affected by this? Get some hard data, get some stats, and then we can point to them where the issues lie. I think trying to highlight the issue and say it's a problem, I don't think you can get anyone, I think at least on this call, call to agree that it's not a problem. We need to move beyond that and actually identify solutions and say, how can we actually now get some stats from Health Canada, and what can we do to kind of further better that, and what can we say back to the producers, whether it be women on boards, whether it be more people of color generally in the industry, like how can we get ahead of this narrative? I think that's something that's incumbent on us as well. So I just wanted to kind of state those things.
Terrific as always. So we'll go to Malka now, and then to Nadia afterwards. And then actually, I want to touch on something that was covered in the chat. But Malka, over to you.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Malka LaBelle with the Green Generation Company. My goal is around ending the stigma around cannabis and not paying to do it. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned in the last year of trying to raise money and help my clients build amazing businesses that are awesome is that we need to work together and have a multi-pronged educational approach where we're all sharing our resources with the people that are influential to government. And that, I think, is really how to change people's minds, is go to the people that have the biggest stake, which is in the government here. It's in Health Canada, and Health Canada is the doctors and the medical community. And the barriers for medical communities, they haven't seen the research, they haven't seen the evidence, they haven't seen the proof that it is actually safe and efficacy to replace their toolkit of oxycodone with THC products, as an example. So right now, the barriers to get research done is extremely high, and that's something I think is the lowest barrier to remove, is make the research easier to do at a university, as an institutional level. The grants available are there, but there's only a few of them, and they're sort of spread out. So increasing grant funding for medical research, Health Canada has the full capability to do that, and allow all institutions of all medical level, or of all education institutions at all types, go apply for research grants for real life cannabis research, whether it be medical based context or other. So get the proof in the numbers from reliable sources, and share that proof across all channels. And that's, I believe, is the best ticket to success without really having to mass market or mass advertise. Thank you.
Yeah, great comments as always, Malka, and appreciate them. I see Nadia has her hand up, so maybe we'll jump back to Nadia. And one other thing, just before Nadia makes her remarks, one of the things I saw, and I think it was Rob who put it in the chat, made a couple of comments around access to banking, something that I think is a big point, not necessarily for some of the larger players in the industry, but absolutely we hear day in and day out, can't get a bank account, can't get a loan. So, as we're talking about economic development, would encourage the group to think about some of the things around access to banking and financing. But while you're noodling that around, maybe we'll hear from Nadia.
Thanks, Eric. So on the banking thing, I couldn't agree more. It took 2 years and excessive amounts of effort to be able to bank with Tier A institutions, and that was unnecessarily painful. So I couldn't agree with that point more. I just want to go back quickly to Cameron's point. I do think that there is an opportunity to work with organizations that are more industry related. So for example, as a retailer, I understand that there, many of our arguments fell on deaf ears, but it becomes a far more poignant argument. And I think Mimi Lamb can speak to this, and a bunch of other retailers on the call is, look, we were working with retailers who have been around for a very long time, who couldn't employ people because they couldn't have their doors open, and we employed them. So where other retailers are closing their doors, and you see a vast array down the streets of Toronto and across the country, where they're closing their doors, we're actually picking up leases and opening stores. So we're, from an economic perspective, now is the time to make that argument, because we are the ones picking up so much. In this time, we've employed over 200 people. I don't know that many retailers can actually say this. So it's time now to align with, retail organizations and retail advocacy groups on the retail side. I can't speak for on the LP side, but I can make several points about how economically that we've benefited all the provinces that we're in. And I think it's time to actually create that argument in a cohesive way.
Yeah, terrific comments as always. And I don't see anybody else with their hand up right now, which is of course absolutely fine. So maybe in that regard, while people are still thinking about these topics, we can shift a little bit, mindful of the time too. Just moving to kind of the last subject. And again, these are terrific conversations and they're meant to be organic. So, happy to always jump around back to retail, economic development. I see there's already a terrific conversation happening in the chat around social equity programs. And again, I do a lot of work with US cannabis companies as well. So I'm very well aware of the fact that these social equity programs do exist in a good number of states in the US, and they've actually been quite successful, at least from what I hear from speaking with participants in the US. So again, I think a really, really important conversation. And it's funny because I think this is something that's going to be so overarching that that's a topic that I think will come up in practically all of our roundtable discussion, because it just covers social equity component factors every single aspect of the industry itself. But the last subject matter, we were going to focus on a little bit today was around environmental sustainability. So again, would love to hear types of legal or regulatory changes that the group thinks could help improve environmental sustainability or just help the industry in general. Some of this may tie into packaging as well, which I appreciate is a whole separate conversation, but would love to hear some thoughts on that to the extent anybody has anything they'd like to share. Just check my tab here. No, everybody still wants to be, everybody wants to be shy. Oh, here we go. We got Curran from TGOD who wants to chime in. Thank you.
Can you hear me well? Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, sustainability, of course, I wanted to chime in as it is the basis of how our company was founded. I think that, yes, there are some regulation that needs to be revised in order to help the industry be more sustainable. And of course, the first thing I'm going to say is packaging. Yes, there are options out there that are more sustainable than what we can see right now, but price is still prohibitive. And I think that from a consumer point of view, they don't necessarily understand why there is all that extra package that, some of it is mandated. But ultimately, I think there's really a discussion that's needed within the industry on how we conduct business and what kind of focus we put on sustainability. For example, there's a need for a conversation around on the environmental points like rock wool usage. Not a lot of people know that most cannabis that is sold right now is grown in rock wool, which is used once and sent to landfills, as opposed to living soil, which can be reused for 7 years. So TGOD has been, I think, an early player in that field to make sure that as we set up the company, we make the right decisions to be as sustainable as possible. But if we look at California, for example, there's more and more criticism to the industry for water usage, for energy, for example. So I'm not sure that it's all related to the renewal of the Cannabis Act, but as an industry, there's certainly a conversation. And I would add to this that, if we really look at the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance, which is basically, the focus that any company should look at these three elements these days. When it comes to the social element, it's super important, and everyone is passionate about representation. I think that should be part of a discussion on sustainability. And the same goes for education. This is the social aspect of what sustainability really means. So just, I think we need to be able to talk about sustainability. And also I would add that economic viability is also sustainability of the industry. So I don't know which forum eventually this discussion needs to happen, or if we need as companies to continue to develop in silos and do our own things. But I'm quite passionate about this, and I would welcome any conversations with you guys if you want to talk sustainability.
Yeah, I suspect there are lots of people and hopefully lots of people on this call who want to talk about it. I see Malka, and then we'll go over to Mimi.
Thanks, Eric. Karine, yeah, exactly. So the other than ending the stigma, my company is about being green, and I have a podcast the week about what it means to be green. So I've developed a set of metrics that I think could be adopted industry-wide. They're not new, they're just putting them in place, very similar to B Corp, creating a sustainability report, which has already been done in many other sectors around the world, that just measures what matters. And shout out to Amars and the groups at Elevated Signals for building that into their technology. We just need to be able to measure it first for at least a year, set targets, and then meet those targets for improvement. So sustainability reports templates I have, measuring what matters in your business. There's lots of people that can help with that. And there's lots of new opportunities for this based in Alberta, where we've done it for oil and gas. And now we just can apply the same metrics, very similar metrics for the entire industry for cannabis. And just literally just take a look at it by figuring out what's wrong and measuring it, and then setting goals and making it better. And that's the ultimate goal, to make it improvement. And a lot of the businesses that I'm seeing that are struggling to get started, like Karine mentioned, is that it takes a lot of money to start something new, especially when it's a new technology, like a new packaging material. But it's happening, and it's happening in Canada. Hemp as a feedstock is being done. We're starting out with lots of companies in Alberta that are transitioning their small rural societies into the place where it's going to be a central place for hemp processing, hemp feedstock to make packaging, to make paper, to make all of those things for the industry. The fact that these regulations were put in place created a problem that Canadians can fix. So I want to say that we can export that, and we need to be able to do that with numbers, with our own messaging, and with education, and we're doing it already. So it's just a matter of putting our brains together. Volumes speak everything, and putting in the numbers, the places to measure it, so we can just get it better and better with it over time. So that's the solution, I think, to the problem, and I'm willing to share how we're doing that already. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And again, it ties in nicely to, the conversation we've had multiple times now, how there's no real economic mandate with the government with respect to this file. But on the same note, there's also no environmental one too. And I see Cameron in the comments made, a terrific comment there about, we should be talking about things like grants to retrofit facilities to improve water usage, energy consumption, things like that will help promote sustainability. At the end of the day, I think that's gonna help. Well, it's gonna help the entire industry and help the entire country too, right? This is similar to some of the other topics we've talked about. This is something that is it's so much broader than just the cannabis industry. But as an industry, we want to make sure that we can also and are doing our part. So really important to discuss. And maybe we'll jump over to Mimi again now, please.
Great, thanks. On the environmental impact, that's something that's near and dear to our hearts here at Superette. We do what we can as a retailer. It is difficult to work within that current framework as we just take the end product. And so a lot of our focus has been what happens after the fact. So I think there's a conversation to be had about the initial packaging requirement that I think needs to change. But I think given where we are now, the conversation also needs to be had regarding what do we do after consumption. And so we've tagged along some of the LPs with the recycling initiatives, but feel like this is something that the government can also take on as well and support, whether that be subsidizing or paying for these recycling programs to ensure that we're not left with landfills filled with packages from cannabis, but there's actually a solution, with what is currently in market. And also separate to that, on the creation of these packaging, seeing if there's a way to incentivize innovation here domestically. We're trying to come up with cannabis products ourselves, and a big piece of the conversation is packaging solutions. More often than not, cost is a big factor, or supply chain. And so a lot of the conversations has been around packaging that comes from China or coming from the US and not domestic solutions. I think that's a big problem as well. So any sort of incentive to ensure that we can have solutions in Canada would be great. And I just want to drop in another separate topic. This is unrelated to the environmental impact because I'm not sure if we're going to get to this, but I just want to raise it, is specifically for retailers, the discrepancy between ownership of data between the markets. So say in Ontario, we don't own our data, but it's somewhere in Alberta and otherwise, I'm not sure where that lives, because something like Headset are able to pull reports in those markets. So I'm not sure if there's a federal perspective regarding data of retail sales and who can own and use or sell that.
Excellent, Mimi. Thank you as always. And now we'll just jump to Cameron, and also happy to chat about data too. It's a really interesting point. So happy to jump in on that.
I'll just be really quick on. I'll be really quick on this. Totally agree with what Mimi was saying. On the social equity piece, I think that the Act could do a better job, or certainly like whatever comes out of this review, on making an aspect of cannabis, an economic aspect of cannabis, retail producing as part of a reconciliation and social equity agenda, which is lacking from the Act right now, and certainly the regulatory piece. But I think that if you could have an aspect of it that is reconciliation focused, then I think you're going to see a lot of, I think you'd see a little bit more take up and probably a diversity of advocates as well, that maybe you're not there right now, but who would like to be involved. And I would just also just point out that, you know, cannabis is, I mean, there is a global market for our product, and certainly cannabis oil being one of them. And as I often say, like, environmentally, this is much better than shipping crude over internationally into Europe or China or wherever else. There is a market for cannabis oil. And in 2016, we exported $46 billion of crude oil. We have a $100 billion international market for cannabis oil, which is much healthier and can solve many more problems. So I think that if we can, you know, raise that aspect as well in terms of how we design our trade policies and our promotions, I think that could help greatly, especially as we have different trade agreements either established, whether it's with CETA or whether it's with the UK or the one that is being pursued with UK and New Zealand, Australia. I think there are these opportunities as well for us to promote this as a viable value add that can actually contribute greatly to the health of not only the people but of the country. And I guess the last little bit I would say is that Environment Canada as well should have, and I put this in the chat, but I want to make sure that it's reinforced, in order to be on the agenda from a grant and contribution perspective and a retrofit perspective, they really need to be involved with cannabis sustainability as part of their mandate. It has to be in there, because right now, whenever we're talking about packaging or what have you, we're told by Health Canada that at the end of the day, they make the decision and it's kind of siloed. So again, if what we're talking about is trying to address the environmental impacts, then it has to go beyond just Health Canada, and it has to be a mandate that's shared with environment and climate change at the federal level, as well as provincially and municipally as well. They should be engaged with us and engaging with us, because that's how we're going to get to the zero net carbon emissions and all sorts of other things that the government has just announced. So thank you.
Terrific. And I'm going to do what I do sometimes, which is cold call on my good friend Nathan, because I know, just tying back to some of Mimi's comments, I know data is a really important subject matter for you, for some of your clients, Nathan, who are very data driven, and in general, in terms of some of the conversations you've had with various stakeholders and folks in the government. So not sure if you have anything to chime in on that particular point, but I think it's quite topical. So I wanted to see if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, real quick, I sure can. A great example, or something to really look at, is the consultations that Alberta undertook about data and inducements. They tied the two things together, and they had over 1,100 submissions to that consultative process. They are lots of feedback. The thing that keep in mind is that wasn't just for cannabis; it was for alcohol as well. But that's actually a really interesting point, because they're looking at the opportunity under the world that we live in red tape reduction, to see more harmonization towards an alcohol model for cannabis. In January, it looks like the government will release the report based around what they heard from those consultations, with some recommendations about how to go forward about data and inducements. So it'll be very interesting to see that come in Alberta, and what the ripple effect will that be in other jurisdictions, because there is other provinces that are discussing that right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's good to hear that it's very much kind of top of mind, because it's clearly top of mind for folks on this call. So look, I get we're getting fairly close to the end of our time today. Maybe I'll pause and open up the floor kind of to anybody who wants to make final remarks to the extent that there are any really on any subject matter. And while folks are considering whether they want to chime in with any final remarks, maybe I'll quickly just turn it back to Ryan just for a quick little wrap up. And I'm sure he'll remind everybody, as I will do right now, of our next session on December 9th around marketing, promotions, and labeling. But Ryan, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Yes, if there's anything that somebody wanted a chance to mention today that they haven't yet, please stick up your hand. We've still got a few minutes left and we want to have a chance, whether it's on something we've discussed specifically or otherwise. If you want to get on the record, please do so. I think this has been a really, really great discussion. The 90 minutes flew by, and I can't say that for every one of these Zoom industry type meetings that we've all been on nonstop for the last 8 months. And I got to say, not just in cannabis, but across multiple different sectors. I've been on a bunch of these things too the last several months, and this was by far the best use of the chat I've ever seen, in the sense that everybody's engaged and bouncing ideas and sharing information. So I think this really bodes well for the process that we're in the middle of. As Eric mentioned, our next session is going to be on December 9th on marketing, promotions, and labeling. I have no doubt that many of you have a lot of views to share on those subjects, so we hope you'll join us. A couple of things. The poll is still open, and it will remain open for 30 minutes after this session closes. I would implore you, if you just want to answer a couple of quick multiple choice questions, there's some agree, disagree, yes, no ones on that. It'll take you 10 seconds. Please do it now or when you get off the line. Christy just posted a link to it in the chat and what the meeting number is. That feedback is all helpful for us. If there's something that was discussed you want to agree with or reflect on, or any more detail you want to provide, that's one more avenue to do that. This discussion, the chat, the discussion in the chat, and the survey responses are all being provided to our friends at Dentons and Davies, who are doing us a huge service in helping us take all of this great input and discussion that we're getting and start to process it and sort it and figure out how we turn it into what we present to governments. There were a couple suggestions in the chat around additional consultations. I do want to repeat that these 6 public meetings that we're having are only the beginning of this process. These are big and broad with intent. As we move past that, we will get more targeted in who we want to talk to and making sure that this is a really inclusive consultation, and it's not just an echo chamber, and it's not just those of us who we've managed to find through social media to get and join us on these calls. So we will continue to do that. When we are finished with this session, at one point we will send around the link to this for all of your reference, so you'll get a chance to review this video if you want to go back and track something someone said. It'll also get posted on the National Cannabis Working Group webpage, and it'll be there for your reference. But anyway, I thought this was really great. Nathan, was there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I'm afraid to plug it, but we do also have Ryan and my first attempt at a podcast produced and presented by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Budding Business. Please bear with us as Ryan and I fumble through learning that process together, but it's really exciting. Our first one had the affable Eric Foster on it and the incredible Honorable Anne McClellan, and we're really excited on the next one to be joined by the lovely lady down at the bottom of my screen, Mimi from Supret, and Deepak from Materia. So excited about rolling those out, and looking forward to adding more people in the future as Ryan and I get better and better on that.
Thanks. Why don't we just... I was going to say, as your first guest, you guys did an excellent job, although I'm not sure plugging something where people have to listen to me talk even more is going to be all that successful here, but good luck.
So Eric, why don't I turn it back to you just to close it? I see we've got one more hand raised, you can turn to Nora, and then if there's anybody else that wants to get in a last word, but before we wrap up, speak now. But please, in the half an hour following this, if you haven't, take 2 minutes to fill out the survey as well. So over to you, Eric.
Yeah, well, it's actually over to Nora. So
thank you so much. So as Louder Together Cannabis Advocate Society, what we've done is we've put together a petition on our commons to reallocate the excise sales tax earmarked for law enforcement, which unjustly targets and disproportionately targets BIPOC. So I would love for you guys to sign the petition. It does call for a development of a department for the equity of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to fund community initiatives, including harm reduction programs, community revitalization programs, and the creation of a business development program with the mandate of creating funding opportunities for BIPOC in the cannabis regulated sector. So I'll put the link in the chat if anybody's interested in that. Thank you.
Terrific, and a great way to end the session. Again, such an important topic. Again, I think Ryan, as usual, did a terrific job of summing it up. So not much more for me to say. Again, really appreciate everybody's involvement. I agree with you, Ryan. I've done a number of these sorts of events, including the one obviously last week, but this was really a terrific discussion, and can't say it enough times. It's so important that the industry speaks with one voice, which is really the goal of this. So to be able to get your feedback, it's so incredibly important, and I really do firmly believe it's going to make and result in some meaningful change. And I know Lisa and Ryan and Nathan and everybody else involved in this initiative wholeheartedly agree. So seeing no more hands up, and also only being about a minute or two early, we'll wrap it up now. Again, really appreciate everybody's involvement. I'm easy to reach. You can find me online. You can find me anywhere. I'm usually right here at my desk, pandemic irrespective of that. So appreciate everybody's participation and looking forward to chatting again soon. Thank you, everybody.